So I inherited a team in mining that had been through 3 failed system implementations over 5 years. 3 different consultants each time, different vendors, same outcome. Systems half built, half abandoned, and quite frankly, half-heartedly maintained. When I walked in as the 4th person to lead this digital transformation, they didn't even actually push back. Can you imagine? They didn't even argue. In fact, they just went quiet. That quiet is even worse than resistance. Resistance, at least I can work with. And that quiet actually, in hindsight, meant that they had already decided that this will fail. They were just wanting and or waiting for me to figure that out.
We make mistakes.
We learn.
We grow.
We share.
Shamelessly.
This is Shameless Tuesdays,
the digital transformation podcast brought to you by Transformation Leader.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dzikamai Gangaidzo.
And I'm Nono. Welcome to Shameless Tuesdays. Last episode, we talked about the resistance that lives at the executive table, the leaders who approve transformation and then quietly kill it. Today, we're going to the other end. What happens when it's your team that doesn't want to change? When they've been burned by previous projects and they don't believe a word you're saying?
How did they not believe it? I wasn't there. I wasn't the guy. Anyways, and honestly, honest question underneath that. How do you manage resistance to digital transformation from your own team? That's worse than anything. From your own team. The people who have to do the work. When their resistance is completely irrational.
So that is a fair point. And before we talk about that, I think we need to say something that most transformation leadership content won't say. Sometimes your team's resistance is the most intelligent response in the room. KPMG 2024 said that 54% of employees feel unprepared for changes brought by new technologies. But unprepared is the polite word. What a lot of them actually feel is betrayed. They gave discretionary effort last time, worked weekends, learned new systems, and then the project was shelved or the vendor changed, or worse, the sponsor left, and all that effort evaporated.
God, this is so important because as the incoming leader, your instinct is to see their resistance as an obstacle. That's naturally, and I fully understand that, something to overcome. But what Nono is saying is, and what I've also learned, that the way that we should probably look at it is that the resistance is a data point. It's telling us something about what this organization does to people who trust transformation projects.
There's a term for this in psychology, and it's called learned helplessness. Martin Seligman's research from the 1960s is still one of the most replicated findings in behavioral science. When subjects experience repeated failure in the same domain, they stop trying even when conditions change. They've learned that effort doesn't lead to outcomes, so they conserve energy. Your team isn't lazy 9 times out of 10. They're not resistant to change, they're just rationally conserving energy based on evidence. In your instance, DK, the 3 failed projects is a lot of evidence.
Ain't that the truth? And here's the thing that made it personal for me. That shift supervisor, the one who'd been on the site for 20 years, he looked at me during the first team meeting and said, the last 3 people who stood where you are standing right now said exactly what you are about to say. And I was like, hey. And he wasn't even being hostile, to be honest, to be fair to the guy. He was actually just being kind. He was trying to save me the embarrassment of making promises I didn't know I couldn't keep, especially in an environment where I am new and I believe that I can actually impart or impact this difference and this change.
That's the right way to look at it. Like, I think it's a gift. When someone tells you to your face, they're still engaged enough to warn you. The ones who say nothing, I feel like those are the ones that have completely checked out. At a similar moment in a telecoms transformation, I was brought in to lead a process redesign on day 1. And the team said to me, and obviously I'm paraphrasing this, they're like, we've already redesigned this process 4 times in 3 years, and we're quite good at redesigning processes. We're just not good at being allowed to keep them. And that stuck with me because it told me everything about the organization had done to these people.
So the question becomes, if your team's resistance is rational, if their skepticism is earned, learned helplessness is a legitimate psychological response to their experience, what do you do and what do you actually do? Because you still have to transform to deliver. And maybe this is where I can draw apart and sort of what I have done. And I'm going to try to be a bit more specific because this whole thing, generic advice is useless here, right? So let's go day 1 through 30. I stopped talking about transformation. I completely. I didn't mention the new system. I didn't share the project plan. I didn't show a roadmap. For 30 days, I did only 2 things. I asked questions and I fixed small things that were annoying people. Things that people felt were unjust. Things that people felt were roadblocks. Things that really didn't progress the team's ability to be able to contribute to their full extent. And the printer had been working for 6 months. Take a report that took 4 hours because nobody had automated a data pull. Take a meeting that happened every Monday that everybody hated and nobody wanted to cancel. And it was those tiny things, not transformational things, just competence things.
So you probably didn't realize it at the time, but what you were doing is straight out of Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety at Harvard. Before people will take the risk of engaging with the transformation, which is real risk because they're being punished for it before, they need to believe that this leader, which in your case is you, is different. Not because you said you were different, but because in your examples, you showed it, right? Fixing the printer isn't about the printer. It's about demonstrating that when someone tells you something is broken, you actually fix it. And that's trust at the most basic level.
Exactly right. And I think that's the key. It's the building of trust, the building of like that personal relationship. Quite frankly, I'm glad that I'm as good as the Harvard person because I was doing something that I wouldn't have to go to Harvard. But let's not get there. And maybe I go to the second one. Let's just skip over the fact that I could have gone to Harvard without going to Harvard. But the second one. I then strove forward to look for those sort of informal leaders, not the people on the org chart, but really the people others actually listened to. They took the cues from. In mining, it was often people who shift supervisors, systems engineers, or people who really had been there in the business for longer than the current management team. I went to the shift supervisor, the one who called me out, and I asked for 2 hours of his time, not to sell the project, but to ask one more question. What went wrong the last 3 times? Because I will be hell-bent if I repeated those same things. And then I shut up and listen. And that's it. You just shut up and listen after you ask the question, rather than over-explaining, over-elaborating, and quite frankly, coming here with all the solutions.
Okay, so I want to tie what you've said based on some common principles in change management. So there's an organizational network analysis principle here that most change management approaches do ignore, even though research consistently shows that informal influence networks determine adoption rates far more than formal reporting lines. What I mean by this is the person on the org chart matters for the budget, and the person in the corridor matters for whether people actually use the system. So in your instance, DK, when you went to the shift supervisor first, he was doing what you were doing, what every transformation leader should be doing. And the shift supervisor was doing what he's doing as an influential person when you're having the conversation, that dialogue with one another. But what I think is most important is that a lot of people don't do this, mapping the real power structure before trying to change anything. And I feel like your instincts basically understood that organizational network.
To be honest, I have to admit, you're making me sound a lot smarter than I really am. Like organizational network analysis. Okay, next time I'm gonna tell people I'm about to do an organizational network analysis on your. What? Surely I should be able to I'm putting it in my CV then. I'm putting it in my CV. All right. So, and you know what? The shift supervisor actually told me changed my entire approach. He said 3 things. 1, every previous project team came in with the answer already decided. They consulted the shop floor as a tick box exercise. This one rings dear because I've had this so many times. And that idea where you pretend to listen or you judge, you come with a preconceived idea. People can usually read straight through that. 2, every time the team raised a concern, it was labeled as resistance to change rather than treated as a legitimate input. Again, dear to my heart, because a lot of people would go, the problem is 1, 2, and 3. And at times, and that's the problem, there's a resistance because it's just a new thing. But being able to decide between what might be a legitimate thought or what might be something that you're willing to challenge. And that's what I like to call it. How do we challenge that idea? How do we challenge that narrative? Because that's the key. It's not necessarily to say that your input is wrong or illegitimate. What's the challenge, and therefore what is the solution out of that space? Number 3, nobody ever came back to us to explain why the project failed or apologize for wasting our time. And that's the thing that actually bothers people. It's like you go and you do all of this thing and then it burns and crashes and they pretend like, let's just move on. Elephant in the room. The 3 things, all of them human. None of them were actual technical, use your brain type of things, right?
Well, use your
And-
brain, but not your technical brain, not your engineering brain.
Yeah, well, yes. And none of them on any project methodology checklist. So you go and you must do one. Oh, and like I said, I'm so glad you're around because you provide me the assurance that I am more legitimate than I am. So though I'm running on instinct, you're there like, well, that's organization network analysis. I'm like, that is exactly what I told them.
I repeat, do not say this to anyone.
I am not. Look, you've no idea. Just like that other guy, you have now changed my world. You've rocked my world. You did.
Well, I think, so I know we're talking about resistance, right? And we talked about the organizational trust and all that jazz. But the most important thing that I think transformation leaders need to understand is that when you're dealing with humans have trauma that they're bringing in from work. And every failure can portray itself as a trauma response. So when you say the third one where, like no one came back to explain or apologize, think about that does to like trust. It tells the team that their efforts is disposable and the experience don't matter enough to close the loop. And I read a piece recently on organizational trust that said that trust is built on drops and lost in buckets. So 3
Wow.
failed projects with no closure isn't 3 buckets, it's a flood. And you're standing in the aftermath asking people if you get back into the water. And I know I do a lot of water analogies. Just so you know, I am a water element star sign. So I was like, damn, I talk a lot about water. And I'm like, oh, wait, I'm a water. And maybe there's like, I'm wearing blue. Like, I'm kidding. Okay, I digress. Go on.
Hey, look, if the shoe fits, wear it. Or as you'd like to say, just flow like water. If it is what it is what it is, like water. Like, and I really love that idea. And I think you said, trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. Powerful. That is such. And one of the things, which is actually the third thing, is I felt that in my previous tasks, I lost a lot of trust based on the way that I spoke to the team. And that was the third actual thing that he said to me. And it was like, this one, when I look back, I've historically messed it up. And I hope, and I continue to learn from it. And in a new space where you're trying to do some transformational work, the natural instinct is to try to be inspirational, braveheart. Hey, let's go out. This time is going to be different. This time we're going to get it right. This time we're going to plan and we're going to be better than last time.
Forever.
Imagine, right? So you're going to be like, to the promised land. And quite frankly, sometimes if it was that easy, if it was just about motivational speeches and talks, then I don't know if you would have been the person to have to come to solve this problem of 3 people deep, right? So what I ended up learning instead was maybe slight different ways of talking to the team. And I have to say, one person actually turned to me and it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And that point really drives that point around how we talk to our teams. And so some of the ways that I then ended up rephrasing is, I don't know if this will work, or humor me. Let us challenge ourselves to try something different. What I know is that this way we're going to work is going to be different. And if it works out, there's a benefit. If it doesn't work out, we're just in the same space as where we are. And there's nothing wrong with things not working out. I need you to also warn me or tell me early and not late. I would rather hear bad news in 3 weeks than to discover disaster in 6 months. And for me, that idea also ties into that building team where we talked about that safety, that psychological safety of being transformative. It's okay for it to fail, but you also walk that walk by saying, guys, what I'm putting forward here might not work, but it might work, but I need your input to get it to work. And that input might be feedback, or it might be direct input into the initial attempt to get it to work.
And I think that a lot of leadership textbooks kind of miss that out. And even if you look at like change management frameworks, they all say create a compelling vision. And I'm not saying that's not important. I do think that having an inspirational, charismatic leader does help get people maybe even listening and, communicating that urgency very clearly with a healthy team. That totally is fine. But in your instance, when the team has been burnt and is flooded with like failures, probably also trauma, disappointment, all those negative feelings, honesty is the only currency that's going to work. They've heard inspiring before and they haven't heard honesty, right? And the people are not even looping back and telling them anything.
That idea of they've heard inspiring but they haven't heard honesty, I believe, is the quickest way to lose trust. And also where you change a lot of people, that becomes the theme of the change is unkept promises. And then as those build up, what I've seen is you end up building or stacking up levels of resentment because each person who came in brought inspiration, brought promises, brought failed promises. And the more of these that come in, the more it stacks up. The individual is the same. And what do you expect? Nothing else. But somebody once told me, a wise person once told me I should never count, but I'm counting because I think I said I was told 3 things, but I'm on the 4th because I just remembered it right now. The wise person told me, don't count. Just say Ziggy, just say DK. Somebody told me these things, some things, not somebody told me 3 things and then I count to 4. But here's the 4th one that I just remembered right now. Make quick wins visible to the team, not to management. Something that's worked for me, and even something small, I name it. In the team meetings, in the planning meetings, in the group discussions, not in the steercos. And I named who made it work publicly, specifically. I was like, don't want to use the name because they'll know I'm talking about them. Figured out how to cut this report in half. That's the kind of thinking that's going to make everybody want to make it work because they can know and they can be sure that they're going to get recognition. They will be like, I guess, what I'm doing can create value, and first and foremost, I am going to be recognized for it, which is opposite to their experiences prior, where, quite frankly, they might have not known or they might not have been provided those small wins that build up that momentum.
And I feel like that's literally how you reverse learned helplessness. In Seligman's research, he shows that it's not reversed by motivation or vision, it's reversed by evidence. So small, repeated proof that this time the effort produces a different outcome. And you were manufacturing that evidence by demonstrating it, by calling people out by name and being very specific. And I think most importantly, being very consistent.
Consistency is key. It's also difficult. And I guess it was after about 7 weeks of being consistent with my moments and lapses. But it was after about 6 weeks that the shift supervisor came to me in the corridor and said, I think you might actually work. I think this might actually work. And he didn't say it in a meeting. Quite frankly, I think he was a bit still skeptical, but he could see almost some promise. He said it quietly because he was still protecting himself in case it didn't work. But he was starting to believe. And that belief, when he started believing, this team started believing because he was the informal leader, not me. And that allows for me to then be able to, how can I call it? Gain the critical mass that I need in order to have a transformation.
So, can we talk about what change management gets wrong? Because I think the frameworks actually make this worse.
Go on.
Okay, so we got Cotter, we got Adkar, we got Prosky, and they're all built on the assumption that you're starting from neutral, that people are in a ready state waiting to be moved through stages of awareness, desire, knowledge, ability. But if your team has been through failed transformations, they're not starting from neutral, they're starting from negative. And no change framework accounts for inherited distrust. The World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report lists internal resistance to change as one of the top barriers to business transformation globally. But they frame it in a way that says you need to overcome this. But it's also a blocker that should be removed. And I feel like what you said, DK, you've been describing it as resistance is information. It's diagnostic. It's data points, to use your words specifically. And it's telling you you what the organization has done to its own people. So it's that way of like listening to what's being said between the lines.
Deep. Firstly, I want to, yeah, you're busy using Carter and Prosky and what did you say?
Well, like you
Darker
understand that there are other things that frameworks have gotten wrong, in this timeline.
Yeah, look, yes, there are other things that frameworks get wrong in the timeline. And every methodology has a sort of a phase stage that suggests that this can be done in months, 12 weeks for discovery, 16 weeks for implementation, go live, hypercare, done, right? Tick, tick, tick. But with a burnt out team, are we going to go through a tick box exercise with a burnt out team? The first 3 months, you're not doing transformation. You're doing relationship repair. The actual transformation starts after that. And any leader who tells you they turned a resistance around in a quarter is either lying or does not realize the team is still complying. And, it's such an interesting thing because I was having a lot of pressure to deliver upon something as I was trying to do this relationship repair. And the only other thing that I would like to add to that is that at times you might find an opportunity, whether it's an individual in the team, whether it is pockets of work that you can do personally, where you can actually start to put the wiring in so that as you're repairing the relationships, some of that wiring is also going in the background. But it's not necessarily transformation because the transformation piece comes later.
Yeah, but I think you mentioned something that resonated with me about the resistance of the team, and you don't realize if they're just complying because compliance without commitment, that's a silent killer. And I feel like even culturally, right? Some cultures might be more prone to compliance because if you're in a high power distance culture or high power distance organization, there is an expectation that you must listen to the leader and you must comply. So they do what you ask. They hit the milestones, they attend the meetings, but they haven't changed how they actually work. And the moment you leave, everything will revert back to normal. And that's why we still have, that 70% failure rate. And in our last episode, we talked about how it's actually 88% if you measure it from the baseline. So it isn't about getting things wrong or right. I think it's about understanding that the change isn't sticking even after the project goes live. And if the change doesn't, then you actually haven't implemented digital transformation or a transformation project.
Funny question or funny statement. I'm sometimes a very argumentative person. And there's one person who I was reporting to, I go, I don't want to do this. And then he just look at me and they go, it's not about whether you want to, it's about compliance. You're going to comply. And I was like, and I wasn't necessarily committed to the cause, but I guess it was a very small piece of work. But, and I guess my only point for saying that is that on a larger scale, you might not agree with every element of the project, and maybe some portions of you might be compliant, but as a whole, you have to get that buy-in and you have to get that commit. So, and I saw this also in another implementation where the go live metrics looked perfect. Adoption rates, usage numbers, everything green. But when you went back 6 months later and the team was running the new system and the old system in parallel still, they just added work instead of changing the work because they didn't trust the new system enough to let the old one go.
I think that that's the ultimate test for whether your fostering teams work actually succeeded. And that's the F in the lift framework that we talk about. It's not whether they adopted the system, it's whether they choose to adopt it, whether they're using it because they believe in it or is it because they're complying with you. One survives your departure, the other one doesn't.
And so let's bring it back all the way home. How do you manage resistance to digital transformation from your own team? You don't overcome it. You earn the right to ask them to move. First, fix the small things. Find the real influences. Be honest about what you don't know. Make quick wins visible to the team and give it time, real time. Because the trust that has destroyed over 3 projects is not just rebuilt over 3 months.
And if you're in this right now, if you can feel the silence in the room, the compliance without commitment, the meetings where everyone agrees and nothing changes, you're not alone. This is the most common scenario in transformation leadership. And the Shameless Circle is where transformation leaders share exactly these scenarios with peers who have been in the same room. No advice giving, no consulting, just honest conversations with people who understand what you're going through. Free to join, link is in the show notes.
You don't transform resistant teams by being more convincing. Hell, I could be convincing, but really you do it by being more trustworthy. And trust in a team that's been burnt, it's built one kept promise at a time. Thanks for listening.
Stay shameless.
This podcast is brought to you by Transformation Leader. You can follow us at www.t4leader.com.